A good story often begins with a little evisceration. Mine certainly did. And it was the most empowering lesson I learned as a new keeper for Call of Cthulhu. Are you ready for a little mad science? Are you ready to journey with me to the most ill-fortuned island in Massachusetts? Tonight we're going deep and drawing blood in the Lightless Beacon for Call of Cthulhu. My name is John, and I'm a keeper.
April 12th, 1926. A ship bobbing along the Atlantic coast on a moonless night. You are a passenger aboard that ship. The choppy waters drive the vessel dangerously close to rocky shoals and sunken wrecks. But you are in no real danger, just so long as the lighthouse remains lit.
The Lightless Beacon is a one-shot horror scenario for Call of Cthulhu. It was written by Lee Carr and Lynn Hardy and published in 2019 by Chaosium. And it also is dedicated to Greg Stafford, who was the founder of Chaosium. So that's pretty cool. The story, in brief, is that the investigators are aboard the USS Essex, bound for Rockport, Massachusetts on the night of the new moon. A storm begins to brew just as the ship is nearing Beacon Island, and the lighthouse has gone inexplicably dark and causes the ship to wreck. The investigators quickly find themselves in a lifeboat racing towards the darkened island through that stormy night. And when they get there, that's when the real trouble begins. It's a fairly quick adventure, about 18 pages, plus handouts and pre-generated characters. It's considered an introductory scenario for Call of Cthulhu. The best part is you don't even need the full rulebook. It is easily playable with just the quick start rules, available for free, also from Chaosium's website. Timing for the scenario is variable, ostensibly runnable in about an hour or two. My own experience and the experience of other keepers is that you're probably going to need more time than that. I would say at least 3+ hours, up to maybe no more than 5 or 6. Probably. It is also set in the classic 1920s era, though with a little preparation and forethought, a keeper could probably update it to just about any time period they like. In this video, I'll be beginning with a general overview of the scenario. Then I will tell you how I ran the scenario, what I learned from that, and then end with some concluding thoughts of my own. Let me remind you, however, that no keeper's experience is ever going to be the same as any other. So if you're prepared, click that like button and click that subscribe button and follow me into the minds of Lee Carr and Lynn Hardy as we talk about the Lightless Beacon. But beware, spoilers ahead. First, the background. The events of the Lightless Beacon take place about 2 months before the investigators actually enter the story. A ship carrying gold from the South Seas to Innsmouth, Massachusetts for the esoteric Order of Dagon, a cult dedicated to the Great Old Ones, wrecks in the middle of a storm near Beacon Island when the lighthouse there goes dark after a mechanical failure. Since then, members of the Order have been attempting to retrieve the gold without attracting any attention. Meanwhile, lighthouse keeper George Cassidy has discovered some of the gold on the shore of Beacon Island, and has been trying to hide it from his co-lighthouse keepers, while also trying to secretly reach out to appraisers on the mainland, trying to earn his fortune from these gold coins he's discovered. When he makes the mistake of contacting the Order for help, they begin to scout the island, planning to silence Cassidy and retrieve their gold. They decide to launch an attack on the island on the night of the new moon, to take advantage of the extra darkness. On the night of the attack, one of the Deep One hybrids who had been scouting the island leads a group of vicious fish-like creatures called younglings to the island. They're described in the module as kind of a distant relative to Deep Ones, having anglerfish-like heads and froggy legs and duck-like feet and spiny fins, and also shooting poisonous barbs out of their skin. Killer froggy platyporcupines. They murder the 2 remaining lighthouse keepers, though losing some of their own number in the process, and a stray bullet from Cassidy's gun strikes the beacon light, putting it dark just as the USS Essex carrying the investigators is approaching Beacon Island in the rising storm. With the light out yet again, no moon to steer by, and the clouds rapidly rolling in, the Essex wrecks near Beacon Island and the investigators have to head to the island for safety. I thoroughly enjoy the main setup of this scenario with this kind of murder mystery occurring in this lonely lighthouse. It reminds me of that old Doctor Who episode, Horror at Fang Rock. However, the weird coincidences do kind of bug me. I mean, what are the chances that a single lighthouse goes dark on a stormy night, causing a shipwreck twice within 2 months of each other? This has got to be the unluckiest lighthouse in New England.
Aye, the beacon's out again, Captain. Wait, no, it's on. Off? Maybe on? Oh, wait. It rotates, doesn't it?
To be fair, opening in the lifeboat is one hell of a punch to open up the scenario with. Just getting to the island is a harrowing adventure in and of itself, but they will eventually make it there, and once they do, they will be free to explore as they may. Most of the accessible portion of the island consists of the lighthouse tower and cottage, a few outbuildings, and the 2 docks on the north and south sides of the island. The rest is taken up by dense thicket and rocky outcroppings. Keepers should bear in mind that the younglings are still out there mindlessly searching for that gold without their hybrid leader to lead them. Keepers can use this as an opportunity to really build tension with hearing the strange, kind of garbled noises that these creatures make somewhere deep in the thickets of this island in the darkness. It's a nice little fallback you can employ if the action begins to sag and you want to inject a little bit of drama. More than likely, the investigators will probably make their way first to the cottage, and before going in, they may discover 2 sets of prints outside the front door. One are just normal boot prints, but the other one are described as duck-like prints. If they follow the prints, they may find the horribly mutilated body of Michael, one of the lighthouse keepers, who also happens to be a secret undercover government agent. They'll find his notes, and also a very sticky revolver left in the gore. Inside the cottage, the investigators will find plenty of clues to explain just what the hell's been going on this island, including George Cassidy's journal and correspondence with the mainland. They will also discover bloody evidence of a struggle in the kitchen that will eventually lead them to the grisly scene at the top of the lighthouse tower, where they find George Cassidy dead, plus a Deep One hybrid, and a couple of youngling corpses. There's a bullet hole through the beacon light, and around the dead keeper's neck is his bag of Dagon gold, hanging there like fishman catnip. One fun little gag that keepers have at their disposal while the players are investigating the cottage and lighthouse is the failing generator out in the shed out back. The leaky roof is causing the machine to short as rain drips in upon it, and unless the players can repair it, then it will eventually fail completely and the lights will go out all over the island. Even if they do repair it, the younglings may destroy it during the final assault. Or if they find it but they don't repair it, it becomes kind of a ticking clock counting down to the point where the generator finally fails, cutting off all electricity to the island. Once the keeper decides that the investigators have explored the island enough, the younglings will begin the final assault, attacking all the players en masse. Exactly how much mass they are on is up to the keeper to decide, but this should be a potentially deadly fight. But there are a few ways the investigators could escape. They could, of course, try to take the last stand approach, trying to hold off the youngling attack until they run out of reinforcements or until the sun rises and they all abandon the attack. Or maybe they could bargain with the fish things for the remaining gold so they'll leave them alone, if they can communicate their intentions to them. They could try to escape to the rowboat at the south end of the island and fight their way to shore through the storm while being pursued by fish creatures, but once they get there, they'll discover that there's another Deep One hybrid waiting for them on the shore who is ready to call up more monsters because nothing's fair in Lovecraft country. Lastly, there's also the damaged radio in the lighthouse tower, which, if repaired, could summon the Coast Guard for aid, though it, of course, would take a while for them to actually get there, with the storm still raging and the beacon out, if, of course, the investigators can convince them to come at all. Say again, Beacon Island, I didn't quite catch that. Over. Fish monsters? This adventure can get brutal. It's rife with deadly encounters that could drive the players to madness, death, or just maybe to riches if they manage to get away from the island with some Dagon gold coins, which of course won't have any negative repercussions in the future. And there you have the basics, though there are other story elements at play here if the keeper chooses to include them. There's a whole subplot about a secret investigation into a smuggling operation on the island, involving one of the keepers actually being a secret agent who's investigating George Cassidy because he's a former smuggler, plus plot hooks for all of the pre-generated characters linking them into the events of the story. However, I personally consider this whole aspect optional and even a little ridiculous. Again, what are the chances of an undercover agent investigating smuggling tailing a lighthouse keeper with a history of smuggling at the same moment that another bureau agent who's in contact with the first bureau agent is riding on a ship with another former smuggler who's in contact with the first former smuggler, and all four of them are about to converge on the same island on the same night? That's not a murder mystery. That's a Shakespeare comedy!
Mary, but here's the man whom I'm to meet.
Hail, my lord, but is not there the villain Cassidy?
By my troth, master, there doth the villain stand.
Oh, vile Cassidy, such treachery to a former friend!
Zoons, but what fairy market matter doth here before?
Why, the scales do falleth from mine eyes, my lord. We are parried men of the law, who are twixt familiar, while here in same circumference are two other men, though of mean estate, who are belike known to each the other man.
Hey ho, surpassing strange a crossing of our stars, that did lay us to one sphere.
The truth hath come to light, let us therefore all be wed.
Aye, and bountiful indeed shall be the nuptial bed.
Putting that aside, there are inclusions to this adventure that I very much appreciate. Since this is intended as a learning scenario for both players and keepers, there are plenty of sidebars and notes offering tips on how to run the adventure. Seasoned keepers can ignore all this, but for new keepers like I was when I first ran it, it's useful to have all this extra information to hold the keeper's hand to ensure that they know how to employ the mechanics in certain situations or how to build a scene. Now that's all you need to know to run this scenario for yourself, but for keepers who would like something just a little extra, I invite you to share with me my experiences of running this scenario. If, however, you'd like to skip over my self-serving ramblings, feel free to go to this timestamp below. Otherwise, let's go deeper, shall we? At this point, you might be reasonably wondering, what's with the whole knife thing? Well, this is the part where I explain that. This is actually my favorite kitchen knife. It's an Emerald brand. Kids, ask your parents about a man named Emerald Lagasse.
Bam!
While it is true that the Lightless Beacon was my first experience running a scenario for the Call of Cthulhu system, I am, as you will come to know if you stick with me long enough, a hopeless overachiever. After reading through the module, I hit upon several improvements that I thought that I could make, or that I thought would better suit the kind of story that I wanted to place in the hands of my players. I made a few aggressive changes and several minor ones right from the start, so bear that in mind when I explain to you my experiences. There were too many weird, freakish coincidences for me to run the scenario as written, so that is where the most invasive surgery began. First, I moved the date of the first shipwreck from just a couple months ago back to the mid-1800s, back in the early days of the Esoteric Order of Dagon, so the treasure had been well and truly lost for several years. I also cut any reference to that shipwreck having occurred as a result of the lighthouse failing, and thus leaving the cause of the wreck comfortably vague. An old fishwives' tale, if you will. Secondly, just for fun, I changed that handful of coins to a full chest of coins for George Cassidy to find half buried on the shore, just to make the potential prize for the players at least as tantalizing as, I don't know, the possibility of staying alive. I also cut the whole subplot about smuggling and undercover secret agents, and instead created a partnership between Cassidy and Michael to keep the gold a secret from the third lighthouse keeper, Smith. Of course, not fully trusting each other, I gave Cassidy and Michael their own separate piece of information for how to retrieve the gold from its hiding place. Doing this kept some of that cloak and dagger feel that I think they were going for when writing the scenario, and also giving greedy players a potential secondary goal to work for, while also setting up potential for some backstabbiness. Now, of course, this also made the tie-in backstories for the pre-generated characters completely irrelevant, but it did free up my players to create their own characters and really have a sense of ownership over those characters. The final notable change I made was deciding that the Esoteric Order of Dagon actually caused the storm that wrecked the Essex, using their magical ties to the ocean that would raise a swell to cover the youngling assault on the island, while also preventing easy escape or rescue. This made what occurred on the Essex an actual surprise to the crew and passengers who were expecting just an easy night crossing, and it leads to more tension and drama from this unexpected storm. Starting out the scenario this way, while the ship is still traveling on relatively calm waters, really kicks off a mounting series of events that sort of begins with this mysterious, deep sub-oceanic boom that kind of sends a tremor through the ship, and the passengers and crew are kind of looking at each other confused at what's going on. And then the water begins to become more choppy and more swaying the ship more than it was before. And what started out as a light rain is now slowly building into this actual rising storm that the crew wasn't prepared for. So they're running around and trying to batten down hatches and lash down equipment and all that stuff that happens now that they're in a storm that they weren't expecting. And then the lighthouse beacon goes out and they lose control of the ship, and there it goes, jarring crunch onto the rocks, and the ship is now sinking, and the crew are trying to orderly get the passengers into their life jackets and get them onto the lifeboat and get them to safety, when all of a sudden one of the crew shouts out, "Oh my god, water's gotten into the boiler!" And the crew panics and just like releases the safety valve on the lifeboat, just sending it plunging into the water. And the investigators are now panically rowing away from the ship while trying to get away, just as the ship, that cold oceanic water, hits the boiler and causes it to rupture and blow the ship to smithereens. And there's the players now rowing away from the one vessel that could have gotten them to safety, now on this tiny, tiny lifeboat going through a stormy sea, trying to reach the one point of safety, a tiny island in the middle of a dark, stormy night. God, I love keeping. From that point on, I stuck more or less to the text of the scenario, with one or two exceptions. I took a tip from Graham from RPG Nook, and I moved the body of the third lighthouse keeper, Smith, who was captured and tortured on the mainland by hybrids, and moved it into the workshop on the island for the players to find. In my version, the players actually found his mutilated corpse hanging limp from the hand that had been nailed to the workbench in an effort to torture information out of him. I also decided that instead of a painter, as he is in the scenario, that Smith was actually an amateur photographer, and he had set up kind of an improvised darkroom in the workshop, and the players discover him by walking in and seeing blood pooling from beneath this black curtain hanging in the workshop. The scenario can wrap up differently depending on the group. One of my groups hadn't really found that many clues, but they had found just enough to kind of work out more or less what was going on with these strange coins, and so they threw them out for the younglings to find, and then managed to hold them off just long enough for them to barricade themselves in the tower, and they just stayed there holding down the fort for the night in a kind of I Am Legend style. Another party also got rid of the coins, but one of the players pocketed some of the coins without the other character seeing, a move which would have repercussions in a later scenario. They managed to fix the radio in the tower and alert the Coast Guard and to convince them to actually come and rescue them. They too had a standoff with a couple of younglings in the tower, but this time I actually made it so that the younglings could climb out through the windows in the radio room just below the tower balcony, so that they could actually climb up and get at the investigators and cause a bit of a greater threat, so they would know that being in the tower wasn't necessarily the safest place to barricade themselves. Once they were through that fight, the players finally spotted the approaching Coast Guard vessel, and knowing it no longer safe in the tower, they ran down the lighthouse steps just in time for younglings to come bursting in through one of the cottage side doors, and this led to a whole merry chase as they're slipping and sliding in the mud and gravel trying to get down to the south dock where the Coast Guard is coming to meet them. They took some wounds, but they were able to escape with the Coast Guard, though there would be a government inquiry later. And, of course, one of them still had some of those day-gone coins. A real chancer, that investigator was. He's dead now. As a new keeper going into this scenario, I had a lot to learn, obviously, but the first and most powerful lesson I learned right out the gate was, you are not beholden to the text of the module. I knew there were parts of the story that didn't make sense, or that would make better sense with some modifications, so I made the changes, and I think that the scenario was better for it. The cuts I made, plus the changes that I made, were brought up in a debriefing I had with my players after the scenario, and they agreed with me that I probably made the right call on those changes. You have instincts for storytelling. You do. If you are a consumer of horror stories, or any kind of stories, whether it be movies, or books, or video games, or whatever, you have that data in you. If something in a text feels off, consider why it feels off. Follow those instincts. It probably feels off for a reason. And of course, feel free to add your own elaborations to make more fun for your players, because that's what it's really all about. No one ever has to know. Except if you're a show-off like me. The second greatest lesson I learned actually had nothing to do with the module itself, but with the handling of bouts of madness. The madness mechanics in Call of Cthulhu are part of the selling point of the game system, but they are a little tricky to get used to. I had a great experience when one of my players had a bout of madness, and I randomly rolled on the table and it came up with violence, and that player ended up chasing all of the other investigators around the island with an axe. Good times. On the other hand, another one of my players suffered a bout of madness. I rolled on the table and I rolled for amnesia. So all events leading up to that moment were just completely obliterated from the player's mind all of a sudden. Now, that player didn't really know how to play this off, so they just kind of became blissfully unaware of everything. They kind of wondered about the lighthouse. Oh, who are these people? Oh, what is that? Is that blood? Oh, my goodness. Everything. Oh, there's knocking upon the door. Shall I answer the door? Somebody get the door. I'll get the door. And you know what? It was boring. I realized that amnesia actually wasn't a very interesting bout of madness for them to suffer in that particular scenario. And I figured that that player would know how to handle it because they were indeed a seasoned player.
It was my sister, you guys.
But of course, I should have realized she was as new to these mechanics as I was. Knowing what I know now, I could have made the situation better by either A, choosing a different bout of madness, or B, commit to the role, but build that scene into my player's mind. In other words, guide the player's mind into the scene. Make it clear why that character is undergoing a sensation that is now unsafe and ill-timed. Your vision blurs as your mind rebels against the horror it's witnessing, locking itself deep away into your subconscious. And in your conscience reawakening, you have lost all sense of where you are and why you are there. All around you, you're surrounded by pale, tense faces looking at you. And you can smell the smell of something awful mixed with the smell of gunpowder. Why is that woman holding a gun? Why is there banging upon the walls? What are those things lying around? Why is there so much blood? A pro tip, your description of the scene is probably not going to sound much like that. I know mine certainly wouldn't. That's the benefit of scripting. But my point is this. Your players may be just as new to these mechanics as you are. And especially with introductory scenarios like this that should be borne in mind whenever you introduce new mechanics into the game. Your players control the action, but you control the scene. We had a blast playing this scenario, you guys. It is a total Agatha Christie style closed mystery with a Night of the Living Dead survival horror twist, and I strongly recommend it for new players and new keepers. I just have a few final thoughts. As I said, I think the story is a little weird with all of the coincidences and the whole smuggling subplot. I would consider that completely optional and not at all necessary to make the story thrilling. There's plenty going on with some greedy lighthouse keepers attracting the attention of a monstrous entity who really, really want their gold back. Like the Hobbit in reverse. Secondly, I would recommend that keepers, especially newer keepers, brush up on the chase mechanics for Call of Cthulhu. It's more than likely that it's going to come in handy at least at some point in this scenario. The rules for chases aren't outlined in the text of the scenario, nor even in the Quick Start Guide, which is a bit of a shame. But there are plenty of resources out there on YouTube or other videos or web pages that at least cover the basics. They can be a bit confusing and weird at first, a bit like me, but they do become easier once put into practice. That's enough of my yammering and knife wielding. You guys go and check out the Lightless Beacon, download it for free, and the Quick Start Guide from Chaosium's website. You have absolutely nothing to lose checking these out.
Hi there, I'm Scarface the Duckling, and this here's Mo the Octopus. We're here to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more horrifying content. Ain't that right, Mo? I trained him not to speak. You're doing a good job, Mo. Doing a good job. Now, good night, everybody.